I never thought my own parents would choose my sister's wedding dress over my life, but here I am staring at my phone in complete disbelief. My mother just called, demanding I contribute $66,000 for Madison's dream wedding. The same parents who refused to help when I needed $25,000 for emergency surgery that nearly killed me. 2 years ago, they watched me sign financial ruin papers in that hospital bed, claiming they couldn't afford to help their own daughter. Now they expect me to fund Madison's fairy tale while I'm still paying off the debt from almost dying. 2 years ago, I was putting in another late night at the marketing firm where I work as a coordinator. The Chicago office was nearly empty except for security and a few other workaholics like me. I had been feeling off all day, but deadlines wait for no one, especially not when you're trying to prove yourself in a competitive industry. Around 9:30 that evening, a sharp pain sliced through my right side like someone had just stabbed me with a red-hot knife. I doubled over at my desk, gasping for breath as the pain intensified with each heartbeat. My coworker Tracy, who was grabbing files from the next cubicle, heard me cry out and rushed over. "Jeannie, what's wrong? You look terrible." She said, her face etched with genuine concern. The fluorescent office lights suddenly seemed too bright, making everything feel surreal and terrifying. "I don't know. This pain just hit me out of nowhere." I managed to whisper between waves of agony that were now radiating from my abdomen down my right leg. Tracy didn't hesitate. She grabbed her keys and insisted on driving me to Northwestern Memorial Hospital, even though I protested that I could take an Uber. During the 20-minute drive through downtown traffic, the pain became so excruciating that I could barely form coherent sentences. The emergency room was a blur of bright lights, urgent voices, and medical equipment. After what felt like hours of tests, blood draws, and scans, Dr. Martinez delivered the diagnosis that changed everything: acute appendicitis. The infection had progressed to a dangerous stage, and I needed immediate surgery or risk the appendix rupturing completely. "We need to operate within the next 2 hours," Dr. Martinez explained, his voice calm but serious. "This isn't something we can wait on or treat with medication. Without surgery, you're looking at life-threatening complications." I called my parents from the hospital bed, my hands shaking as I dialed their number. Robert and Carol lived only 30 minutes away in the suburbs in the same 4-bedroom house where Madison and I had grown up. When they arrived, they seemed genuinely worried, asking the right questions and talking to the medical staff about my condition. Then came the conversation that shattered my faith in family forever. The hospital billing coordinator, a soft-spoken woman named Patricia, sat down with us to discuss the financial aspects. My insurance would cover 60% of the surgical costs, but I would still be responsible for nearly $10,000 up front, with the total procedure costing around $25,000. "Mom, Dad, I don't have $10,000 sitting in my checking account," I said, feeling vulnerable and scared in that hospital gown. "Could you help me with this? I'll pay you back as soon as possible." My father, Robert, shifted uncomfortably in the plastic visitor chair. He's an insurance broker who makes well into the 6 figures annually, always dressed in expensive suits and driving luxury cars. "Jeannie, you have to understand we have our own retirement to think about. We can't just throw money around." My mother, Carol, nodded in agreement. She'd been a high school English teacher for 30 years before retiring with a full pension. "You're 26 years old, honey. You're an adult now. These are the kinds of responsibilities that come with being independent." I stared at them in shock. This isn't a vacation or a shopping spree. This is emergency surgery. I could die without it. "Don't be so dramatic," Carol said, her voice taking on that familiar dismissive tone I remembered from childhood disagreements. "Hospitals have payment plans. You'll figure it out." They stayed for another hour making small talk and asking about my job as if we hadn't just discussed me potentially going into massive debt to save my own life. When visiting hours ended, they hugged me goodbye and promised to check on me after the surgery. I watched them walk down that hospital corridor, their footsteps echoing against the polished floors, and something inside me broke that had nothing to do with my infected appendix. The surgery went perfectly from a medical standpoint. Dr. Martinez removed my appendix laparoscopically, and my recovery progressed without complications. But the financial recovery was brutal. I had to sign paperwork agreeing to a payment plan that would stretch my budget thin for the next 3 years. My credit cards took a massive hit, and I had to move to a smaller, cheaper apartment to manage the monthly medical bills. During my week-long recovery at home, my parents called twice to check on my physical healing. They sent flowers and a get well card, but they never once mentioned the financial burden I was carrying because of their refusal to help. 3 weeks after my surgery, I discovered something that made their betrayal even more painful. Tracy mentioned that she had driven past their neighborhood and noticed construction vehicles at my parents' house. When I called my mother to ask about it, she excitedly told me about their plans to renovate the kitchen. "We're spending about $50,000 on the whole project," she said cheerfully. "Granite countertops, custom cabinets, the works. Your father says we've earned it after all these years." $50,000. They were spending $50,000 on kitchen renovations just 1 month after claiming they couldn't afford to help me with $10,000 for life-saving surgery. The hypocrisy hit me like a physical blow, and I had to end the phone call before saying something I might regret. To understand how we reached this point, I need to take you back to the beginning, to a pattern that had been building for my entire life. Madison. My younger sister, by 3 years, had always been the golden child in our family. From the moment she was born, everything revolved around her needs, her wants, and her dreams. While I worked summer jobs starting at 14 to save money for college, Madison spent her summers at art camps that cost more than I made in 3 months. When I turned 16, my parents gave me a used Honda Civic that I had to share with my mother. When Madison turned 16, she received a brand new Volkswagen Beetle painted her favorite shade of purple with a giant bow on top for her birthday surprise. The college funding disparity was the most glaring example of their favoritism. When it came time for me to apply to universities, my parents sat me down for a serious conversation about financial responsibility and the importance of choosing an affordable education. I ended up taking out $40,000 in student loans to attend a state school where I studied marketing and communications. Madison, on the other hand, was encouraged to follow her artistic dreams wherever they led. She attended a prestigious private art school in California, studying photography and graphic design. My parents paid her entire tuition room and board, and even gave her a monthly allowance for supplies and entertainment. The total cost was over $100,000, and they never once mentioned financial concerns. After graduation, I moved back to Chicago and started working immediately to pay off my student loans and establish my career. Madison moved back home and took a part-time job at an upscale boutique downtown, working just enough hours to afford her art supplies and social activities. She lived rent-free in her childhood bedroom, which my parents had redecorated as a trendy studio apartment, complete with professional lighting for her photography work. 6 months after my emergency surgery, Madison announced her engagement to Brad, a software engineer she had met through mutual friends. Brad comes from a similar privileged background, and his parents own a successful technology consulting firm. The engagement party was held at an exclusive country club with over 100 guests and champagne that cost more per bottle than I spend on groceries in a week. At the engagement party, I watched my parents beam with pride as they discussed wedding plans with Brad's family. The conversation centered around venues, caterers, and guest lists that would accommodate at least 200 people. Madison showed off her engagement ring, a stunning 2-carat diamond that probably cost more than my annual salary. "We want this to be perfect," my mother announced to anyone within earshot. "Our little girl deserves a fairy tale wedding." My father nodded enthusiastically. "Whatever Madison wants will make it happen. This is a once-in-a-lifetime celebration." I stood there in my clearance rack dress, still making monthly payments on medical bills, watching my parents promise unlimited financial support for an event that would last 1 day. The contrast between their attitudes toward my life-threatening emergency and Madison's wedding celebration couldn't have been more stark. Over the following months, wedding planning consumed every family gathering. Madison would spread brochures across my parents' dining room table, showing options for venues that cost more than most people's annual salaries. The Ritz-Carlton Ballroom was her top choice with a price tag of $40,000, just for the reception space. Money is no object, my father would say, reviewing catering menus that featured $30 appetizers and $100 entrees. We've been saving for this day since Madison was born. That statement particularly stung because I knew they had never set aside a penny for my future milestones. When I had mentioned wanting to buy a house someday, my father's response was that I needed to build my credit and save my own down payment like any responsible adult. My Aunt Susan, my mother's sister, started noticing the family dynamics during these wedding planning sessions. She would watch quietly as my parents hung on Madison's every word while barely acknowledging my presence. After one particularly long evening of venue comparisons, Susan pulled me aside in the kitchen. "Jeannie, I've been watching this family for years and I have to say something," she whispered, glancing toward the dining room where Madison was showing my parents flower arrangements on her laptop. "The way your parents treat you compared to Madison isn't right. It's not normal." "I've learned to accept it," I replied, though my voice betrayed the hurt I was trying to hide. "You shouldn't have to accept being treated like a second-class citizen in your own family," Susan said firmly. "Your parents have more than enough money to have helped you with that surgery. I know because your mother bragged to me about their investment portfolio last Christmas." That conversation planted seeds that would eventually grow into a full understanding of just how deep the favoritism ran. Susan began pointing out examples that I had trained myself to overlook. The expensive vacations Madison was invited on, while I was told they were family-only trips with limited space. The professional networking connections my parents leveraged for Madison's photography career, while dismissing my requests for similar assistance in marketing. The breaking point came during a family dinner 8 months after the engagement. Madison was describing her latest wedding inspiration, a destination bachelorette party in Napa Valley that would cost each attendee $1,500. My parents were nodding along, enthusiastically already planning how they would contribute to make sure all of Madison's friends could afford to attend. "What about a honeymoon fund?" my mother suggested. "We could set up a registry where guests contribute to your trip to Europe instead of giving traditional gifts." Madison's eyes lit up. "That's brilliant. Brad and I want to spend 3 weeks touring Italy and France. We've been looking at packages that cost around $20,000 for a honeymoon." I excused myself from the dinner table and went to the bathroom where I sat on the closed toilet seat and tried to process what I had just heard. My parents were casually discussing funding a $20,000 vacation for Madison while I was still paying off debt from nearly dying because they wouldn't help with $10,000 in medical expenses. That night, I went home and started really looking into my parents' financial situation. What I discovered would change everything I thought I knew about my family and set the stage for the confrontation that was about to explode our family dynamics forever. The phone call that shattered any remaining illusion of family loyalty came on a Tuesday morning in early October. I was getting ready for work, running through my usual routine of coffee and checking emails, when my mother called with what she presented as exciting news. "Jeannie, darling, I have the most wonderful update about Madison's wedding plans." Carol's voice bubbled through the phone with an enthusiasm I rarely heard directed toward my life events. "Oh," I responded cautiously, already sensing this conversation would somehow involve my wallet. "Well, we've been working with this amazing wedding planner, and she's helped us create the most gorgeous celebration you can imagine. The venue is confirmed at the Ritz-Carlton. We've booked the best caterer in the city, and Madison found this incredible designer dress that's absolutely perfect." I waited for the other shoe to drop, knowing my mother's conversations always had an agenda. "The thing is," Carol continued, her tone shifting slightly, "the total cost has come out to be a bit more than we initially budgeted. But this is Madison's special day, and we can't possibly cut corners on something so important." "How much more?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "Well, when you add everything up, the venue, catering for 200 guests, Photography, flowers, music, Madison's dress, the honeymoon, and all the little extras that make a wedding truly special. We're looking at about $132,000. I nearly dropped my coffee mug. $132,000. I know it sounds like a lot, but when you break it down, it's really quite reasonable for a wedding of this caliber. My mother explained as if she were discussing grocery shopping instead of a sum that exceeded my annual salary. Mom, that's more money than most people make in 2 years. I said, feeling dizzy from the sheer magnitude of what she was describing. Which brings me to why I'm calling. Carol continued smoothly. Your father and I have been discussing how to handle the finances, and we think the fairest approach is for everyone to contribute according to their ability. We'll cover the majority, of course, but we were hoping you could contribute $66,000 toward Madison's special day. The silence that followed was so complete I wondered if the call had dropped. $66,000. My parents, who had refused to help me with $10,000 for emergency surgery, were asking me to contribute $66,000 to fund my sister's wedding extravaganza. Jeannie, are you there? My mother's voice cut through my shocked silence. I'm here, I managed to say, though my voice sounded strange even to my own ears. Did you just ask me to give you $66,000? Well, when you put it that way, it sounds harsh, Carol said, her tone becoming slightly defensive. This is about family, Jeannie. This is about supporting your sister during the most important day of her life. Besides, you have a good job and no major expenses. Madison's wedding is a once-in-a-lifetime event. The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. No major expenses, Mom. I'm still paying off the medical debt from my emergency surgery. You know, the surgery you and Dad refused to help me with because you couldn't afford it. That was different, my mother replied quickly. That was a medical issue. This is a celebration, a family milestone. Surely you can see the difference. The difference is that one was necessary to save my life and the other is an optional party. I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Jeannie, I don't appreciate your tone, Carol said sharply. Madison's wedding is not just a party. It's the beginning of her new life, and as her sister, you should want to support that. Before I could respond, I heard Madison's voice in the background, and suddenly she was on the phone too. Jeannie, Mom told me about the contribution plan, and I'm so excited that you want to be part of making this day perfect. Madison said, her voice bright with genuine enthusiasm. I've already been thinking about how to thank you in my wedding speech. This means everything to me. The assumption that I had already agreed to hand over $66,000 left me speechless. Madison continued talking about wedding details, mentioning the designer shoes she had picked out and the expensive floral arrangements as if my financial contribution was a foregone conclusion. Madison, I haven't agreed to contribute anything yet. I interrupted, my voice firmer than I had intended. What do you mean? Madison asked, confusion evident in her voice. Mom said you were going to help with the wedding costs. I mean, I haven't agreed to give anyone $66,000, I said clearly. That's an enormous amount of money that I simply don't have. The conversation spiraled from there. My mother took the phone back and began explaining how family obligations work, how weddings are investments in future happiness, and how disappointed my grandmother would be if she knew I wasn't supporting my sister's big day. Madison chimed in with hurt feelings about my lack of enthusiasm for her wedding plans. We need to discuss this in person. My father's voice suddenly joined the conversation, apparently having been listening from another extension. Why don't you come over for dinner tomorrow night, and we'll work out the details like a family. There are no details to work out, Dad, I said, finding my backbone for the first time in the conversation. I can't and won't contribute $66,000 to Madison's wedding. We'll see about that, my father replied in the stern tone he had used when I was a teenager trying to negotiate curfew extensions. Family dinner tomorrow at 6 o'clock. We'll sort this out properly. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at my phone for a long time. The audacity of their request was staggering, but what hurt most was their complete inability to see the hypocrisy. They were asking me to fund a luxury celebration while I was still struggling financially because of their refusal to help during a genuine emergency. I called Tracy and explained the situation. Her response was immediate and fierce. "Are you kidding me right now? They want you to pay for Madison's wedding after they wouldn't help you with surgery." Tracy's voice was sharp with indignation. "Jeannie, please tell me you're not actually considering this." "Of course, I'm not considering it." I said, though part of me was already dreading the family confrontation that was clearly coming. "But you don't understand my family dynamics. They're going to make my life miserable until I agree." "Then maybe it's time to stop caring about making your family comfortable," Tracy said bluntly. "They clearly don't extend the same consideration to you." That evening, I spent hours going through my finances, trying to understand how my parents could possibly think I had $66,000 available for wedding contributions. My savings account had barely recovered from the medical expenses, and I was still making monthly payments on the remaining debt. The idea that I could contribute more to Madison's wedding than they had been willing to contribute to save my life was so absurd, it would have been funny if it weren't so painful. The next day dragged by at work as I dreaded the evening confrontation. I knew my parents well enough to predict their tactics, emotional manipulation, guilt trips, and veiled threats about my place in the family. What I wasn't prepared for was discovering just how deep their financial deception had been running and how much they had been hiding about their ability to help me during my medical crisis. The family dinner that was supposed to sort things out properly turned into the most explosive confrontation our family had ever experienced. I arrived at my parents' house at exactly 6 o'clock, steeling myself for what I knew would be an orchestrated attempt to manipulate me into compliance. The dining room table was set with my mother's best china as if the formal presentation would somehow make their outrageous demand more palatable. Madison was already there with Brad, both looking uncomfortable as they sensed the tension crackling through the air. "Jeannie, sweetheart, come sit down," my father said in his fake cheerful voice, the one he used when he was about to deliver bad news to insurance clients. "We have so much to discuss about this wonderful celebration we're planning." "Dad, there's nothing to discuss," I said, remaining standing near the doorway. "I've already told you I can't contribute $66,000 to Madison's wedding. That amount of money is completely unrealistic for someone in my financial situation." My mother set down her water glass with more force than necessary. "Your financial situation would be much better if you made smarter choices about your spending and career advancement, Jeannie. Madison has been very responsible with money, which is why we feel comfortable investing in her future." The accusation that I was financially irresponsible because I couldn't magically produce $66,000 for a party was so infuriating that I actually laughed out loud. "Responsible with money," I repeated, looking at Madison, who was still living rent-free at 25 years old. "Madison has never paid rent, never bought her own car, and works part-time at a boutique. How exactly does that qualify as financial responsibility?" "That's not fair." Madison protested, her eyes filling with tears. "I'm building my photography business. Art takes time to develop into a sustainable career. Most people build their careers while paying their own bills." I replied, though I felt bad for upsetting Madison, who genuinely didn't understand how privileged her situation was. My father leaned forward in his chair, adopting the authoritative posture he used during business negotiations. "Jeannie, you're 28 years old with a steady job and no dependents. Madison is about to start a new chapter of her life, and weddings are expensive investments in family legacy. Surely you can understand the importance of supporting your sister during this transition." I supported myself during my transition from nearly dying. I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Where was the family legacy investment when I was signing financial hardship papers in a hospital bed? That was completely different. My mother snapped her facade of pleasantness, finally cracking. "Medical emergencies are unpredictable expenses that adults have to handle independently. Weddings are planned celebrations that families traditionally support together. Medical emergencies that could kill me are less important than optional parties," I asked incredulously. "Stop calling it a party." Madison cried, tears now streaming down her face. "This is my wedding day. This is the most important day of my entire life, and you're acting like it doesn't matter." Brad finally spoke up, looking deeply uncomfortable with the entire situation. "Maybe we should consider scaling back some of the expenses. A wedding shouldn't put anyone in financial hardship." The look my mother shot at Brad could have frozen fire. Madison deserves the wedding of her dreams, not some budget compromise. She's been planning this day since she was a little girl. "And I've been planning to stay alive since I was born," I shot back. But that wasn't worth a family investment. My father stood up abruptly, his face red with anger. "That is enough. You're being selfish and dramatic, Jeannie. This family has always supported each other during important milestones, and I won't allow you to ruin Madison's happiness because of some misplaced resentment." Misplaced resentment. I repeated, staring at him in disbelief. "You think my resentment about nearly going bankrupt to save my own life while you renovated your kitchen is misplaced?" The silence that followed was deafening. Madison looked confused, clearly unaware of the timeline between my surgery and the kitchen renovation. Brad was studying his hands, obviously wishing he was anywhere else. My parents exchanged a look that confirmed they knew exactly what I was talking about. "How do you know about the kitchen renovation costs?" my mother asked quietly, her voice taking on a dangerous edge. "Because you told me about it," I replied. 3 weeks after my surgery, you excitedly shared how you were spending $50,000 on granite countertops and custom cabinets, $50,000 that you couldn't spare to help your daughter with life-saving surgery. Madison gasped. $50,000! You spent $50,000 on the kitchen renovation. That money was already earmarked for home improvements, my father said defensively. It was a completely separate budget from emergency expenses. Emergency expenses that you told me you couldn't afford? I said, feeling vindicated that Madison was finally seeing the financial double standard. The argument escalated from there, with accusations flying in all directions. My mother accused me of being jealous of Madison's happiness. My father threatened to cut me out of family events if I didn't show proper support for my sister. Madison sobbed about her wedding being ruined by family drama. I finally had enough. "You know what? You want to know why I won't contribute $66,000 to Madison's wedding. It's not just because I don't have that kind of money. It's because you taught me that family doesn't help family during genuine emergencies. You taught me that being an adult means handling life-threatening situations independently, so I'm applying those same family values to optional celebrations." I grabbed my purse and headed for the door, but my father's voice stopped me. "If you walk out that door without agreeing to support your sister, don't bother coming back for family holidays. You'll be making a choice about what kind of person you want to be." I turned around slowly, looking at each of their faces, my parents red with anger, Madison devastated and confused, Brad clearly wanting to disappear. I already made that choice 2 years ago when I almost died alone because my family wouldn't help me, I said quietly. I chose to be the kind of person who survives without depending on people who only show up for celebrations, not emergencies. As I drove home, my phone started buzzing with text messages. Some were from Madison begging me to reconsider and asking why I was trying to ruin the happiest time of her life. Others were from my mother, alternating between guilt trips about family loyalty and threats about being excluded from future gatherings. But the most disturbing messages came over the following days as my parents launched what could only be described as a smear campaign among our extended family. They called my aunts, uncles, and cousins, painting me as selfish and jealous, unwilling to support my sister during her special time. They conveniently omitted any mention of their refusal to help during my medical emergency. My cousin Detective Mike called me 3 days after the dinner disaster. "Jeannie, I just got off the phone with your mother and I have to ask what's really going on here," Mike said without preamble. "She's telling everyone you're refusing to help with Madison's wedding because you're jealous, but that doesn't sound like the person I know you to be." I explained the entire situation to Mike, including the timeline of my surgery and their kitchen renovation. His response was immediate and angry. "Are you telling me your parents wouldn't help you with $10,000 for emergency surgery, but they want you to contribute $66,000 for a wedding?" Mike's voice was tight with controlled fury. "Jeannie, that's not just unfair. That's financial abuse disguised as family obligation." I'm starting to realize that I admitted feeling validated by his reaction. "Listen, I work with financial crimes investigations sometimes, and this kind of manipulation raises red flags for me," Mike said carefully. "Have you ever looked into your parents' actual financial situation? Because people who can afford $50,000 kitchen renovations and $100,000 weddings usually have significant assets." That conversation with Mike planted the seed that would eventually uncover a financial deception far worse than I had ever imagined. My parents weren't just choosing Madison over me. They had been systematically stealing from my future to fund her lifestyle using money that was legally supposed to be mine. The family war that erupted over their wedding contribution demand was about to reveal secrets that would change our family dynamics permanently and finally give me the ammunition I needed to fight back against years of financial manipulation and emotional abuse. Mike's suggestion that I investigate my parents' finances led me down a rabbit hole of discoveries that made their refusal to help with my surgery even more unconscionable. I started by having lunch with my friend Lauren, who works as a financial attorney and had offered to help me understand my legal options. "The first thing we need to figure out is whether your parents actually have the money they claim they don't," Lauren said as we sat in her downtown office, surrounded by law books and case files. "If they're hiding assets while claiming financial hardship, that changes the entire dynamic of this situation." Lauren walked me through the process of requesting financial documents that I was legally entitled to see. Since my grandmother had passed away 5 years earlier and left an estate that was supposed to benefit both Madison and me equally, I had the right to review the trust fund management and distribution records. What we discovered made me physically ill. My grandmother Helen had been a frugal woman who worked as a bank manager for 40 years and invested wisely throughout her career. When she passed away, she left an estate worth approximately $400,000 with explicit instructions that the money should be divided equally between her 2 granddaughters when we each turned 25. According to the original estate documents, I should have received $200,000 on my 25th birthday 3 years ago. Madison would receive her portion when she turned 25 next year. However, the trust had been managed by my parents as co-trustees, giving them discretionary power over the timing and method of distributions. "Jeannie, according to these bank records, your portion of the inheritance has been distributed," Lauren said, her voice carefully controlled as she reviewed the financial statements. "But it wasn't distributed to you." The documentation showed a series of withdrawals from the trust account over the past 3 years, totaling exactly $200,000. The money had been transferred to various accounts under my parents' control, with vague notations about educational expenses and family support services. Educational expenses for whom? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I already knew the answer. Lauren flipped through more documents cross-referencing dates and amounts. Based on the timing, it looks like these withdrawals coincided with Madison's art school expenses, her car purchase, and several large payments to travel agencies and luxury retailers. My inheritance had been stolen to fund Madison's lifestyle for the past 3 years. The money that should have been sitting in my bank account providing financial security and emergency funds had instead been spent on my sister's art school tuition, her European vacation, her car, and countless other expenses that my parents had presented as gifts from their own resources. "There's more," Lauren said grimly, pulling out another set of documents. "These records show that your parents have been taking management fees from the trust account fees that were never authorized by the original estate documents. The unauthorized fees totaled nearly $20,000, over 5 years' money that had been siphoned directly from the estate into my parents' personal accounts. They had been stealing from both Madison and me. though Madison remained blissfully unaware since her portion hadn't been distributed yet. "Lauren, this means I had the money to pay for my surgery." I said, the full impact of the theft finally hitting me. When I was lying in that hospital bed begging for help, I actually had $200,000 sitting in a trust account that my parents were stealing from. "Not only did you have the money, but your parents knew you had the money." Lauren replied, her professional composure cracking slightly. "They chose to let you go into debt for life-saving medical care rather than give you access to your own inheritance." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. My parents had watched me struggle with medical debt, watched me move to a cheaper apartment, and cut expenses to afford the monthly payments, all while spending my inheritance money on Madison's privileges and luxuries. I spent the next week gathering additional evidence with Lauren's help. We requested bank statements, reviewed expense records, and documented the systematic misappropriation of trust funds. The pattern that emerged was clear. Every major expense in Madison's life over the past 3 years had been funded with money that legally belonged to me. Her art school tuition, $40,000 from my inheritance. Her car, $25,000 from my inheritance. Her trip to Europe, $15,000 from my inheritance. Her rent-free luxury bedroom renovation, $12,000 from my inheritance. Even her engagement ring, which I had assumed was a gift from Brad, had been partially funded with $8,000 from my inheritance money my parents had given to Brad's family as a contribution to the engagement celebration. Meanwhile, my parents' personal financial statements revealed assets worth over $600,000 in investments, retirement accounts, and property equity. They were wealthy by any reasonable standard, certainly wealthy enough to help their daughter with emergency medical expenses without any meaningful impact on their lifestyle. "What are my legal options?" I asked Lauren during our final document review session. "You have several avenues for recourse," she explained. "First, this is clear-cut trust fund mismanagement. Your parents violated their fiduciary duty as trustees by using your inheritance for unauthorized purposes. Second, the unauthorized management fees constitute theft. Third, you can demand immediate restitution plus interest and penalties." "What about criminal charges?" I asked, surprised by my own desire to see my parents face legal consequences for their actions. "Financial elder abuse and trust fund theft are serious crimes," Lauren said carefully. "However, criminal prosecution would be up to the district attorney's office. Civil recovery might be a more practical approach, especially since we have clear documentation of the misappropriated funds." That evening, I sat in my apartment staring at the mountain of evidence that proved my parents had been stealing from me for years. The money I had begged them for during my medical emergency was money that already belonged to me, money they had been systematically stealing to fund Madison's privileged lifestyle. The next morning, I called my parents and requested a family meeting. It was time for them to face the truth about what they had done and to understand that their financial manipulation had finally been exposed. The confrontation that followed would either result in full restitution and accountability, or it would mean taking legal action against my own parents to recover my stolen inheritance. Either way, the family war they had started over Madison's wedding contribution was about to become something much bigger than any of us had anticipated. The family meeting I called for the following Sunday was unlike any conversation our family had ever had. I arrived at my parents' house carrying a folder full of bank statements, trust documents, and legal findings that would shatter their carefully constructed narrative about money and family obligations. Madison and Brad were already there when I walked in, sitting on the living room couch looking nervous and confused. My parents had clearly prepared them for another round of wedding contribution negotiations, not a confrontation about financial crimes spanning multiple years. "Jeannie, I'm glad you called this meeting," my father said, settling into his favorite armchair with the confidence of someone who believed he still controlled the situation. "I hope you've had time to think about the importance of family support during milestone celebrations." "Actually, Dad, I've had time to think about a lot of things," I replied, setting my folder on the coffee table, including some very interesting discoveries about family finances and trust fund management. The change in my mother's expression was immediate and telling. Her face went pale and she gripped the arm of her chair as if bracing for impact. "What kind of discoveries?" Madison asked innocently, still unaware of the bombshell I was about to drop. I opened the folder and pulled out the bank statements Lauren had helped me obtain. I've been reviewing Grandma Helen's trust fund records, and I found some very troubling discrepancies in how the money has been managed. "Jeannie, that's private family, financial information," my father said quickly, his voice taking on a warning tone. "It's my inheritance, Dad. I'm legally entitled to review how it's been handled," I replied calmly. "And what I found is that my $200,000 inheritance has been completely distributed over the past 3 years, but none of that money came to me." Madison looked confused. "What do you mean I thought we weren't supposed to get our inheritance until we're 25? "I turned 25 3 years ago," I said, looking directly at my parents. "According to Grandma's will, I should have received $200,000 on my 25th birthday. Instead, that money was used to pay for your art school, your car, your trip to Europe, and various other expenses that Mom and Dad presented as gifts from their own income." The silence that followed was deafening. Madison stared at the bank statements I had spread across the table, her eyes growing wider as she recognized transaction dates that corresponded with major purchases in her life. "That's not possible," she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. "It's all documented right here," I said, pointing to specific entries. $40,000 for your art school tuition, $25,000 for your car, $15,000 for your European vacation. All of it came from my inheritance, not from Mom and Dad's savings. Brad leaned forward to look at the documents, his expression growing increasingly troubled as he processed what he was seeing. "Madison, did you know about this?" "Of course I didn't know," Madison said, tears starting to form in her eyes. "Mom and Dad told me they were paying for these things because they wanted to support my artistic development." My mother finally found her voice, though it came out shaky and defensive. "The trust gave us discretionary authority over distributions. We used our judgment to provide opportunities for both of our daughters." "What opportunities did you provide for me?" I asked pointedly. "Because when I needed life-saving surgery, you told me I had to handle it independently as an adult. But when Madison wanted to take an art class in Paris that was worth $15,000 of my inheritance money—" "You don't understand the complexities of financial planning," my father said, but his usual authoritative tone sounded hollow and desperate. "I understand theft," I replied. Lauren, my attorney friend, explained it very clearly. Using trust fund money for unauthorized purposes is a crime, especially when you deny the beneficiary access to funds they're legally entitled to receive. Madison was now openly sobbing. "You used Jeannie's money to pay for my life. Everything I thought you gave me out of love was actually stolen from my sister." "Madison, don't be so dramatic," my mother said sharply. "We provided opportunities and support that benefited our entire family. Jeannie has a good job and doesn't need financial assistance the way you do." "I needed financial assistance when I almost died," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "I needed exactly $10,000 to avoid going into debt for emergency surgery, and you told me you couldn't afford to help. Meanwhile, you had already stolen $200,000 of my inheritance to fund Madison's lifestyle." Brad stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back. "Madison, we can't accept any more money from your parents. Not for the wedding, not for anything. This is completely unethical." "But the wedding is already planned," Madison cried. "The deposits are paid, the invitations are ordered. Everything is arranged." "Then we'll figure out how to pay for it ourselves, or we'll scale it back to something we can afford," Brad said firmly. "I won't be part of a celebration funded by stolen money." My father's face turned red with anger. "No one stole anything. We managed the trust according to our best judgment for the benefit of both daughters. Your best judgment was to let me go into debt for life-saving medical care while spending my inheritance on Madison's luxuries," I asked incredulously. "Medical expenses are an adult responsibility," my mother insisted, clinging to her original justification even as it crumbled around her. "But art school tuition and European vacations are family investments," I countered. I pulled out the final document from my folder, the one that Lauren said would be most damaging to their position. This shows $20,000 in unauthorized management fees you've been taking from the trust over 5 years. Money you had no legal right to touch. Madison looked up from the bank statements with horror. You've been stealing from both of us. We haven't stolen anything, my father said desperately. We've been providing for our family's future. By robbing one daughter to spoil the other. Brad said, his voice tight with disgust. How is that providing for anyone's future? I stood up, gathering the documents back into my folder. Here's what's going to happen. You have 2 weeks to begin full restitution of my stolen inheritance, including the $200,000 plus interest and the $20,000 in unauthorized fees. You'll also need to provide a full accounting of Madison's trust fund to ensure none of her money has been misappropriated. And if we refused, my father asked, though his voice suggested he already knew the answer. Then Lauren files a civil lawsuit for trust fund theft and financial elder abuse, I said. She's also prepared to recommend criminal charges to the district attorney's office if you prefer to handle this through the criminal justice system. Madison was crying so hard she could barely speak. I never wanted any of this. I thought Mom and Dad were just being generous. I would never have accepted those things if I knew they were stealing from you. I know you wouldn't have, I said gently, sitting back down to comfort my sister. This isn't your fault, Madison. But it does mean we need to figure out how to move forward as a family, knowing the truth about how we've been treated. My parents sat in stunned silence as the full implications of their exposed financial crimes settled over them. The wedding they had promised Madison, the lifestyle they had built, the reputation they had cultivated in the community, all of it was about to crumble under the weight of their own greed and favoritism. The family war that had started over their demand for wedding contributions had evolved into something much more serious, a legal reckoning that would either result in justice and accountability or destroy our family relationships permanently. The 2 weeks following my ultimatum were a whirlwind of legal consultations, family negotiations, and emotional reckonings that would reshape our family dynamics forever. My parents, faced with overwhelming evidence of their financial crimes and the threat of criminal prosecution, had no choice but to agree to full restitution. Lauren handled the settlement negotiations with surgical precision. The final agreement required my parents to return the full $200,000 of my inheritance plus 6% annual interest for the 3 years they had unlawfully withheld it, totaling approximately $236,000. Additionally, they had to repay the $20,000 in unauthorized management fees and cover all legal costs associated with the trust fund investigation. To meet these obligations, my parents were forced to liquidate significant portions of their investment portfolio and take out a home equity loan against their house. The lifestyle changes were immediate and dramatic. The luxury cars were sold and replaced with modest used vehicles. The country club membership was canceled. The planned retirement home in Florida was postponed indefinitely. Most importantly, they were required to provide a public acknowledgement of their financial mismanagement to our extended family, correcting the false narrative they had spread about my unwillingness to support Madison's wedding. The letter they sent to relatives explained that my refusal to contribute to wedding expenses was justified because I had been denied access to my own inheritance money that could have covered such contributions. Madison's wedding underwent a complete transformation. The Ritz-Carlton venue was canceled along with the expensive catering and elaborate floral arrangements. Instead, she and Brad chose to have a small ceremony at a local park pavilion, followed by a reception at Brad's parents' house. The guest list was reduced from 200 to 50, focusing on immediate family and close friends. The most beautiful part was watching Madison embrace this simpler celebration with genuine joy. Free from the pressure of creating a perfect fairy tale wedding, she focused on what truly mattered, marrying the man she loved, surrounded by people who cared about their happiness rather than the expense of the party. "You know what's funny?" Madison said to me as we addressed invitations for her smaller wedding. This feels so much more like me than that huge production we were planning. I got caught up in Mom and Dad's vision of what my wedding should be instead of thinking about what Brad and I actually wanted. Brad's family stepped up to help with the scaled-down celebration, but in a healthy way that didn't involve financial manipulation or emotional strings. His parents offered their backyard for the reception, and his sister, who worked as a photographer, volunteered to take the wedding pictures. The total cost ended up being less than $5,000, and the genuine warmth of the celebration far exceeded anything the expensive version could have achieved. I used my recovered inheritance to pay off all my medical debt, immediately eliminating the monthly payments that had been straining my budget for over 2 years. The psychological relief of being debt-free was almost as healing as the financial freedom itself. I opened a high-yield savings account with the remaining money and started planning for the future goals that had seemed impossible when I was drowning in medical expenses. 6 months after the settlement, I received an unexpected call from Detective Mike with news that would provide the final piece of closure I needed. "Jeannie, I wanted to let you know that your parents' case has had some ripple effects in the community," Mike said. "The district attorney's office has been reviewing other trust fund management cases, and your situation has helped them identify patterns of financial elder abuse that were previously overlooked." "What kind of patterns?" I asked. "Let's just say your parents weren't the only ones using family trust funds as personal piggy banks," Mike explained. "Your willingness to come forward and demand accountability has helped protect other families from similar financial abuse. That conversation helped me understand that my fight for justice had been about more than just recovering my stolen inheritance. By refusing to accept my parents' financial manipulation and holding them accountable for their crimes, I had helped expose a broader pattern of trust fund abuse that was harming other families in similar situations. My relationship with my parents slowly began to rebuild, but on completely different terms. They were required to attend family therapy sessions as part of the settlement agreement, where we worked through the favoritism and financial abuse that had damaged our family for years. The process was painful but necessary, forcing them to acknowledge the harm their actions had caused and commit to treating their daughters with equal respect and consideration. My mother struggled the most with accepting responsibility for her role in the financial theft and emotional manipulation. During one particularly difficult therapy session, she finally admitted that her favoritism toward Madison had been driven by her own insecurities about my independence and success. "I was always worried that Madison wouldn't be able to take care of herself." Carol confessed, tears streaming down her face. "She seemed so fragile and artistic while you were always so strong and capable. I thought she needed more help, but I realize now that I was enabling her and punishing you for your strength." My father's acknowledgement was more straightforward, but equally important. "I failed as a parent and as a trustee." Robert said simply, "I let my wife's favoritism influence my financial decisions, and I betrayed my responsibility to both of my daughters. There's no excuse for what we did, and I'm grateful that you fought back instead of accepting our mistreatment." Madison and I developed a closer relationship than we had ever had as children. She started therapy to address the guilt she felt about unknowingly benefiting from stolen money, and I helped her understand that she wasn't responsible for our parents' choices. She got a full-time job at a marketing agency and moved into her own apartment, embracing the independence she had never been encouraged to develop. A year later, I met someone special at a professional networking event. David is a financial planner who understands the importance of transparency and ethical money management in relationships. When I told him about my family's trust fund drama, his response was immediate support for my decision to hold my parents accountable. "Financial abuse is still abuse," he said simply. "The fact that you stood up for yourself and demanded justice shows incredible strength and integrity." We've been dating for 8 months now, and for the first time in my life, I'm in a relationship built on mutual respect and honest communication about money goals and family boundaries. As I reflect on this entire experience, I've learned that family loyalty cannot be one-sided. True family support means being there for each other during genuine emergencies and celebrations alike, not using love as a tool for financial manipulation. My parents taught me that adults must handle their own medical emergencies independently, so I applied that same standard to optional wedding celebrations. The hypocrisy they showed me became the mirror that reflected their true priorities. Standing up to financial abuse disguised as family obligation was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was also the most important. It taught me that my worth as a family member isn't determined by my willingness to be exploited, and that demanding fair treatment isn't selfish. It's essential for healthy relationships. Madison's wedding was beautiful not because of how much money was spent, but because it celebrated love instead of materialism. My parents learned that their daughter's respect must be earned through consistent fairness, not bought through selective generosity. And I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is refuse to enable their worst behaviors. The most unexpected outcome has been the scholarship fund I established with a portion of my recovered inheritance. The Helen Johnson Emergency Medical Fund helps young adults who are struggling with medical debt from unexpected health crises. Every month I receive letters from recipients who describe the relief of being able to focus on healing instead of worrying about bankruptcy. In those letters, I see my own story reflected young people whose families couldn't or wouldn't help during medical emergencies, who faced impossible choices between their health and their financial future. The fund provides what my parents refused to give me: a safety net during life's most vulnerable moments. My grandmother Helen would be proud to know that her money is finally being used the way she intended, to provide security and opportunity for both of her granddaughters, instead of funding one daughter's privileges while the other struggled alone. Today, both Madison and I are financially independent, emotionally healthy, and building relationships based on mutual respect rather than manipulation. Our parents have learned to treat us as equal adults deserving of equal consideration. The family legacy we're creating now is built on honesty, accountability, and genuine support during both emergencies and celebrations. Sometimes standing up for yourself requires fighting against the people who should have protected you in the first place. But the peace that comes from knowing you refuse to accept mistreatment and the strength that comes from demanding justice are worth every difficult moment of that fight. Have you ever had to choose between family peace and standing up for what's right when money was involved? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life stories about family dynamics and financial boundaries. Don't forget to share this video with anyone who might be struggling with similar family financial issues. Sometimes knowing you're not alone makes all the difference. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you find the courage to demand the respect and fairness you deserve in your own family relationships.